All right, we are live. Jim is right, everybody. I'm stupid. He's smart. I was wrong. He was right. He's the best. I'm the worst. He's very good looking. I'm not attractive. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the current administration's plan to destroy reliable energy in this country. Also, we're going to be talking about the contradiction with everything that Joe Biden is doing. And also, what's the likelihood that the Democratic establishment is going to jettison Joe Biden at their next opportunity? We're going to be talking about all of that and more on episode 351 of the In the Tank podcast. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. And joining me after a week off, we have Jim Lakely, VP at the Heartland Institute. How are you today, good sir?
I'm doing fine. I was in kind of a salty mood today, but after that wonderful introduction by you mentioning all my great attributes and a fantastic decision by the Supreme Court on gun rights, I'm in a much better mood.
Fantastic. Also joining us, we have Chris Talgo, senior, also had a week off last week. Senior editor at the Heartland Institute. How are you today, Chris?
Like Jim, I'm kind of not in the greatest mood because of the FDA decision to ban all Juul products. So I'm in mourning.
Yeah, that could be a topic that we address in the future because that is a topic that we have talked about on this podcast before and at the Heartland Institute, and it seems pretty, I think, to use your term, pretty asinine decision there. But that's for a future podcast. We'll talk about that later. So we got a lot to talk about today, but before I get going, this is that message that I put out there every podcast, which is for mostly our audio-only listeners that are probably catching this on a Friday or maybe over the weekend. You can join us a day earlier on Thursday at noon Central Time for the live show broadcasted on YouTube and Rumble and Facebook and Twitter, or wherever you want to find our faces. You can join in the conversation by leaving your comments, putting in some questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comment on screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. And also, just as a reminder that we do have an In the Tank podcast channel on YouTube specifically for this show when we're talking about things that might be a little controversial, because YouTube has threatened our channel with destruction based on some of the things that Jim has said on the podcast before. So in an effort to not self-censor ourselves, we created a separate channel, In the Tank podcast. So if you subscribe to that, you will ensure that you will not miss an episode. So, gentlemen, let me set up my thesis for this episode first. And we have a bunch of stuff to back up this thesis. And after I'm finished with my little synopsis of things, Jim is going to roll his eyes and say, I told you so, but whatever. So I think, based on some of the new developments that we're going to talk about today, that there is absolutely a coordinated attack on reliable energy being pushed by the World Economic Forum, other advocates of the ESG and the Great Reset, and the Biden administration, but I repeat myself. Of course, this is going to come with political blowback, but I think the plan, in America at least, is to allow all that anger and blowback to be directed squarely at Joe Biden. I think the Dems are going to sacrifice an election or two as the price to pay for this radical transformation of the country. And then when they are serious about winning elections again, they will bring in a new candidate that is far younger and more powerful. Sorry, I've been watching a lot of Star Wars lately. So let's start with the back end of that and work towards the more meaty substance of this thesis here. Obviously, Joe Biden has been taking a lot of heat politically throughout this first year and a half of his presidency. I mean, he didn't even really start off with a whole lot of support. Like, no one was excited about a Joe Biden presidency. His main selling point for his presidency was that he wasn't Donald Trump. So, like, no one really likes him. But then once he was elected, his administration was just battered relentlessly with a slew of bad stories. COVID went crazy, Afghanistan collapsed, the border crisis worsened, inflation boomed, Russia invaded Ukraine. You seriously couldn't go like a week without some new terrible story coming out that made Joe Biden and his administration look bad. And now inflation and gas and energy prices are all out of whack, and it seems like we're running headlong into a recession. So it just kind of begs the question: is Joe Biden going to even run again? I think the Democratic establishment is going to have to seriously consider that question. And, we're still like probably a year away from that question being seriously pondered by the Democratic establishment. But we did get a sneak peek of this quandary about a week ago when CNN's Dana Bash spoke with my second favorite socialist, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So we do have a clip of this, and I want to play it, and then I'll get to Jim and Chris's reactions. Go ahead.
Poll after poll shows Americans believe the country is heading in the wrong direction, with many placing the blame squarely on President Biden. But there are signs even some elected Democrats are wavering in their support for the president. Listen to Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. CNN's Dana Bash asked her today if she would endorse Biden in 2024.
We'll cross that bridge when we get to it, but I think if the president has a vision, then that's something certainly we're all willing to entertain and examine when the time comes.
That's not a yes.
Awkward.
Yeah, I think we should endorse when we get to it. But I believe that the president has been doing a very good job so far, and should he run again, I think that I think it's we'll take a look at it.
Okay, go ahead and stop it there. So there's a couple of interesting things going on there. They kind of edited it a little bit differently because she was directly asked, like, are you going to support Joe Biden for like a second term? And that's when that first part of her answer where it was like, well, I like some of the things he's doing. So, we'll see how all the future transpires and all of that. And then Dana Bash that wasn't a yes. Awkward silence. I feel like there's producers in her ear being like, all right, why are you pressing her on this? Just move on. But then AOC's like, as you could see, the most kind of awkward, I don't want to answer this question ever. So, I mean, I know that it's AOC and she's not fully embraced by the Democratic establishment by any means. But I think it is a little telling of how the future of Joe Biden's presidency exists. I don't know. What do you think, Jim?
Well, there's only two ways that Joe Biden won't run for re-election in 2024. I should say, one, if Jill Biden decides that she doesn't want to be first lady anymore, and if he decides to actually voluntarily pull himself out, or there's actually three ways, or there could be, and the way that would happen is if somebody has something really bad on him and basically would blackmail him into pulling out and not running again, and then the other option is what happened to Jimmy Carter. In 1980, he got primaried. It happens rarely. It's happened to George H.W. Bush as well. Pat Buchanan primaried him. But there has to be another choice. So you either have to have him pull out, or there's a primary challenge to him, which you may very well see. Bernie may do it. I don't know if AOC is going to be old enough yet to be president. Who knows? She may do it. That's the only way that's not going to happen. But I'm just actually wondering what AOC even has to complain about. This is the best president she could have ever hoped for. I mean, the idea that Biden isn't far enough left at this point, I mean, you're going to see in a clip that we play later here in this podcast that he promised in the Democratic primary that he would, quote, end fossil fuels. I mean, he basically tried to move to the left of Bernie Sanders when it comes to a socialist, crazy green radical agenda. He revoked existing oil leases on the North Slope of Alaska, something that Trump allowed after decades of delays. He eliminated the streamlining of drilling lease applications that Trump had put in place. And just last month, Biden's EPA denied an expansion plan at a refinery in the United States Virgin Islands. And why? Because of environmental justice. That's why. So I don't know. I really don't know why AOC would not endorse Joe Biden for president. I encourage her to endorse Joe Biden for president in 2022. The Democratic Party and the left needs Biden in there in order to get all of their agenda items through. Because he's basically just a shell of a president that is an avenue, a puppet, as it were, to get the leftist agenda. And as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, here in the introduction, kind of like the World Economic Forum agenda implemented here in the United States.
Yeah, well, I mean, Chris, what do you think? Do you think he's destined to be like a one-term president? I also have this article, and everything that I referenced will be in the show notes. From The Hill, the article is titled "Biden Can't Escape Questions on His Age." It talks about how, by the time that he runs again for a second term, he'll be 81. And considering Joe Biden's mind, that's an old 81. It also says that the Harvard-Harris poll survey out this month revealed that 62% of respondents said Biden is showing he is too old to be president. The Atlantic's author launched a piece last week with the opener, "Let me put this bluntly, Joe Biden should not run for president in 2024. He is too old." And a poll that we did with Rasmussen just a month or two ago showed that less than half of Democrats want Joe Biden to run again. So, I mean, is the writing on the wall for this guy? Are they gonna put him up again? Maybe put him up to just lose? What do you think?
I think after the midterm elections, Joe Biden's going to announce that he will not seek the 2024 presidential nomination for the Democratic Party.
Bold prediction.
Yep, I do think that's going to happen because I think that we can all see that Joe Biden is not capable of running. Again, he's definitely not capable of governing for 4 more years. We've seen a substantial decline in his mental and physical capabilities in less than 18 months on the job. I can't even fathom what he's going to be like 2.5 years from now when it's time for re-election. And also, like you said, Donnie, many in the media, many in the Democratic Party are openly questioning his age and whether or not he is going to be able to run again. So I think they are trying to get rid of that before it even becomes an issue.
Well, here, we got a comment on here from Nikki on Facebook saying that he's a fall guy. And this is exactly the point that I want to get to. Is Joe Biden the fall guy? Is he just the guy that's going to usher in all of this stuff, be the first real the person pushing for this radical transformation of our society and economy and all of that through fossil fuel, getting rid of fossil fuels and whatever. And then all of that political windfall and fallout will just be directed squarely on Joe Biden. Knock him out, get him out of there. We'll put in someone else. And, when the history books are written, everyone will just look back at Joe Biden as just being this failure, not necessarily representative of the Democratic Party, just him, kind of the same way that Jimmy Carter is talked about. What do you think about that, Jim?
Yeah, I think that's 100% correct. I mean, this is the pattern that followed. That's why we have Obamacare. It's because, the left and the Democratic Party realized this is our only chance to ever get nationalized health care in the United States. And they knew it was going to cost them the midterm elections big time. And it's like Obama even said, we got a shellacking in 2010. That was the Tea Party revolution pushing back against Obamacare. And so they've done this in the past and they're doing it now. I mean, Joe Biden is a shell president. He is there only for the purpose of cramming in as much of the leftist agenda as possible. A lot of it through executive action, a lot of it through, the deep state, frankly, the administrative state that is implementing all of these policies on energy, for instance, is one big one, of course, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that later. But yeah, they are totally willing to sacrifice the midterms, and they realize and they figure, well, it's a lot harder to roll back something that's already implemented than it is to get it done in the first place. So they're going to take a huge political hit for this. They're going to get swamped in the midterms, but they figure, 10 years down the line, most of what we implemented during this time of in a real hurry getting a leftist agenda implemented as policy in the United States, in 10 years, 80% of it will still exist. It'll be totally worth it to them. That's what's going on right now.
Yeah, and I kind of push back against that, and I'll probably repeat myself later, but I always just kind of thought, like, when the rubber meets the road and all of the political repercussions of your terrible policies come to a head, and it's going to result in you losing your position of power, you're going to relent on some of those policies, and you're going to try to ensure yourself that you can retain some of that power that you've put yourself in.
Donnie, you're out of your element. Donnie, you're out of your element.
That's a great double sound drop by you, Andy. but yeah, I think you're right. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, when Joe Biden was elected in his inauguration speech, he said that he was going to bring the country back together, and that after the 4 years of the Trump administration and all the division, that he was going to heal America. He has done the complete opposite of that. he has, from day one, tried to divide, this country, and he has, opened old wounds. He has poured salt in those wounds. Joe Biden, ran as this milquetoast. I'm gonna just, put everything, back to the way it was,
Right.
and he's done the total opposite of that. So
Yeah.
I doubt that he'll have this epiphany at the midterms and pull a Bill Clinton and pivot to the center. I think that he is going to probably even go more to the far left. And after Barack Obama was shellacked in the midterm elections later on in his presidency, what did he say? I have a pen and a phone. So he basically was just telling Congress, I don't care. I'm just going to do what I can anyways. I think Biden's going to take that and do that way more.
Look, even before Joe Biden, is now exposed to all of us, he has progressive dementia and is continuing to get worse day by day. He was always a nasty piece of work. He was always one of the nastiest politicians in Washington. He was basically senator for life. He was never going to be defeated, so he could do whatever he liked. Just because he would smile with those cap teeth of his while he said nasty things about his opponents. Remember, today is a good day for this, because today happens to be Justice Clarence Thomas's birthday, and Clarence Thomas was the lead judge. He was the author of the lead opinion in the gun rights case today, and it was Joe Biden who led the smear campaign against Clarence Thomas during his confirmation hearings. So for decades, Joe Biden has never been a uniter and somebody who's going to bring the country together. It was all BS. And we should also remember that was sold by the media. His entire presidential campaign was a media operation. He was locked in his basement for almost the entire campaign. It's amazing that he got 81 million votes when almost never going outside and having rallies with like 17 cars in a parking lot. And 81 million votes. So wonders never cease.
Right. The same cars in the same parking lots. So there, we talked a lot last episode about specifically the Biden administration's energy policies. So if you want to like a deep dive into some of those things, go check it out. I got a bunch of energy expert people on there with me talking about all of those policies. So it's a very important episode that we did last episode, but there is some kind of larger international, global things that are going on that I want to get into in this episode that almost overshadow those very important things that we talked about last episode. So I do want to get into that. But before we do, Jim, I will just a little behind the scenes here. We were kind of waiting for the last second to like pull the trigger on some of the topics that we've decided on for today's episode, because there's been a lot of developments in the Supreme Court. There's been a lot of findings being released, decisions, I should say, being released. And obviously there's a big one that's hanging out there that people have been waiting for the last month or two. Mm-hmm. But there's also a pretty important energy and climate case that's being ruled on. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the case is West Virginia versus EPA. The state of West Virginia, or actually our Paul Fisher, who's a member of our board of directors and also a lawyer and a contributor and a policy advisor at the Heartland Institute. He wrote a piece on this just a couple of weeks ago. You can check that out. You can find it by just Googling West Virginia versus EPA if you go to the heartlanddailynews.com site. Anyway, so he writes, quote, "This case raises the question whether the EPA can regulate carbon dioxide emissions under the Clean Air Act. There is no mention of carbon dioxide emissions or climate change in the Clean Air Act. The purpose of the Clean Air Act was to regulate pollution, which could have adverse health effects," unquote. So basically, West Virginia, about in 2007, there was a case, Massachusetts versus EPA, which gave the Environmental Protection Agency to regulate, under the Clean Air Act, to regulate carbon dioxide emissions as a pollutant. Carbon dioxide, of course, is not a pollutant. And emitting carbon dioxide does not make you a polluter who should be regulated by the EPA under the Clean Air Act. And so the West Virginia versus EPA case is to basically reverse the Massachusetts versus EPA case that gave the Environmental Protection Agency enormous power over our economy. If you can regulate energy, you can regulate everything. And so the EPA has been regulating our power plants, which is why, we're not building any more coal plants anymore. We transferred to natural gas, which emits less carbon dioxide, quite a bit less than a coal plant. But that wasn't good enough either. So EPA wants to get rid of those and regulate those things out of existence. And so, what's important here is that this case could be I know that the abortion case obviously is an enormous case. The gun rights case today was an enormous case, but this decision on West Virginia versus EPA has the potential to really rein in the power of government in a way that most of us have not actually seen in our own lifetimes. Because you would be rolling back the ability of the EPA to basically have carte blanche regulation abilities through the Clean Air Act. And if the Supreme Court decides even narrowly that carbon dioxide is not a pollutant, so that it's not part of the Clean Air Act and the EPA cannot regulate it, that alone would be a huge victory for conservatives or anybody who actually believes in the Constitution and the rule of law and wants to rein in a runaway administrative agency like EPA. But let's be clear here. The Clean Air Act is a good thing. It was first signed into law in 1963. It's had a couple of major additions to it over the years, including in 1990 when George H.W. Bush signed probably the latest big expansion of the Clean Air Act. And since that time, I looked this up last night. Mobile sources of pollutants, actual pollutants, not carbon dioxide, including automobiles, trains, and boat engines, have become 99% cleaner of pollutants like carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxides and particle emissions since the 1970s. Harmful pollutant emissions from our cars are down 90% from the 1970s, despite the fact that we are driving 400% more miles today than we did when the Clean Air Act was put into law. And mercury emissions from power plants are down 80%. The EPA decades ago should have declared victory. They should have had a huge party and all of America could have celebrated with them. We won. We cleaned up the environment. But the Environmental Protection Agency is completely staffed by radical leftist environmentalists, and they don't want to give up their power. So they pretended, and they continue to pretend, that carbon dioxide is a pollutant and want to regulate it so they can continue to have control over our economy and our lives. This case, West Virginia versus EPA, look for it. It could be coming out any day now. I think it's even more important than the other cases that people are kind of have their attention on.
Yeah, once that decision comes down, which will probably be next week, I assume.
Probably.
Maybe we should address that too. Maybe bring on some type of expert that can get a little bit into the nitty gritty about that. But to go back to my thesis with this Joe Biden and being the fall guy, have you ever seen like one of those movies or TV shows where somebody is set up as the fall guy, and like there's like the murder victim over here, and in this analogy, this would be like the oil industry. And then they're like, oh no, we've got this video of this guy saying all these awful things about this person, so it's probably likely that he's the one that murdered him. Well, we have that video for Joe Biden when it comes to the oil and gas industry. This is a montage of things that Joe Biden had to say during and throughout his campaign for president. Let's go ahead and play it.
Look in my eyes. I guarantee you, we're going to end fossil fuel, and I am not going to cooperate.
As president, would you be willing to sacrifice some of that growth, even knowing potentially that it could displace thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of blue-collar workers in the interest of transitioning to that greener economy?
The answer is yes. Number one, no more subsidies for fossil fuel industry, no more drilling on federal lands, no more drilling, including offshore, no ability for the oil industry to continue to drill, period. Ends. No new fracking. We are going to get rid of fossil fuels.
Would there be any place for fossil fuels, including coal and fracking, in a Biden administration?
No, we would work it out. We would make sure it's eliminated.
So I know the president once said that he was going to end fossil fuel. Is that now off the table?
No, we are going to continue to move forward with our clean energy proposal, our climate change proposal.
So between the years 2021 and 2030, it's irreversible, the path we've set ourselves on. And one of which is doing away with any subsidies for fossil fuels, number one. Number two, holding them liable for what they have done, particularly in those cases where you're underserved neighborhoods and you know the deal, okay? And by the way, when they don't or when they're deliberate, put them in jail. That's what I'm not joking about this. The companies running gas stations and setting those prices at the pump. This is a time of war. Global peril, Ukraine. These are not normal times. Bring down the price you are charging at the pump to reflect the cost you are paying for the product. Do it now. Do it today. Your customers, the American people, they need relief now.
So last episode, I started getting a little heated because I just couldn't understand the cognitive dissonance of trying to separate all of this rhetoric and the things that Joe Biden has done with his energy policy from the effects that are happening at the price at the pump. I cannot understand how people can watch that and be like, oh yeah, but like, what's the explanation? That all of the things that he's been doing are ineffective, that he's completely failed on this attempt to do all the things that he was just talking about. It just doesn't make sense to me. And I went on a pseudo Jim rant on last week's episode because of that. So before I get into this next part or whatever, I'll let you, Jim, talk openly about that kind of discrepancy that I reflected on.
Well, it's this idea that this isn't on purpose. I mean, we may or may not play a clip. I grabbed it from June 2nd, 2022, where I went off and said this is on purpose. And this idea that, Joe Biden actually cares about the high price of gasoline is BS. It's bunk. This is the plan. We know it's the plan. And that montage shows it's always been the plan. And I made that clip myself, and I put on the end. That was just from yesterday or 2 days ago. Joe Biden basically begging the domestic oil producers in this country, and basically the people who own gas stations, to just go ahead and maybe take the 5 in the front of that price and make it a 4 or something, or a 3, and because they could just do that, right? Like they're all profiteers. The guy who runs the 7-Eleven and the BP over on the corner, that guy is just raking in the dough. Like they can do these sorts of things, and so you can't spend, which is just this is why it has to be on purpose. They have spent decades demonizing gasoline companies, and increasingly so this year. And then at the very same time, you're basically asking them to, make less profit now when you want to put them out of business in 5 to 10 years. It's seriously, it's like, I don't think they're actually that dumb. I think they think that we are that dumb. And all you have to do is look at that montage and realize that this is all on purpose and that we're not that dumb. We can figure it out, which is why they're going to get shellacked in November.
Chris, I got a little bit of a bunch of texts that I need to read. So I'll give you another chance to kind of get your thoughts out here before I talk at the audience for the next 4 minutes.
Well, I think that Jim, it hit the nail on the head, months ago when he said that this was intentional. At first I was like, no way, I can't believe that. They're just so incompetent. They're just so inept. They just don't know what they're doing. But then I started to, think back and, Jim's right. Barack Obama said several years ago that the point is to make the price of gasoline so expensive that Americans simply can't afford it anymore. And, Biden has taken that idea and run with it. And, the American people, they see through this. I watch polls. I see a lot of polls. When it comes to the price of gasoline and the inflation issue, Americans are blaming Joe Biden. They are not buying the Vladimir Putin price hike talking point. They are not buying the big oil is greedy talking point. They are not buying the gas stations. Gas station owners are greedy talking point. They know that this is very simply due to the fact that Joe Biden has severely limited the supply of oil and fossil fuels in the United States. And when you restrict the supply and demand remains constant or goes up, as is the case after the pandemic lockdowns, you're going to have a sky high price increase. Right. That is very simply what's happened here. You can add on to that the fact that Joe Biden's American Rescue Plan, in which he just literally printed $2 trillion and just shoveled it into the economy, is also a generator of the gasoline price hikes. Because, gasoline is or I should say oil is it's a commodity that's sold in the world market, and it's bought and sold in dollars. Okay. And when the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury just starts printing trillions of dollars in a short period of time, it's going to take more dollars to buy oil and gasoline. This is totally self-inflicted. This is on purpose. It's intentional. And, you know, their response is, oh, go buy an EV. Well, hey, guess what? Americans can't afford EVs. And last time I checked, how do you charge an EV? Through the through electricity. How do you generate electricity? From fossil fuels, mainly in the United States, because we don't have a wind and solar system in place to charge the EVs that they want Americans to buy. And just to show how out of whack their EV panacea solution is, there are 276 million cars in the United States. Less than 1% are EVs. Less than 1%. How are we gonna force 99% of Americans to say, you know what, get rid of that gas guzzler and go buy an EV? It's just it's so ridiculous. It's so absurd. It's so non-serious. It's getting to the point where the American people are just getting fed up with this.
So the national.
Go ahead.
The national power grid would collapse instantly if we were to instantly just snap our fingers and make 8% of all vehicles on the road electric. In 24 hours, the entire grid would collapse. We don't have the capacity for it.
So like I said, last episode, we talked a lot about Biden's administration policies, energy policies, and the important effect that they have had already and will continue to have on the price of energy and gas in this country. But wait, there's more, because this next thing I'm going to get into might dwarf all of that stuff put together, multiplied by 2. So if you're tuned into this, pay close attention to some of this that I'm about to talk about. So this next section is derived from a new piece authored by our very own Justin Haskins, who I tried to get on the podcast. So bear with me as I convey Justin's arguments and evidence for this thing. But hey, you are getting a sneak peek at this, because I don't think that this op-ed has been published yet. So you're getting a sneak peek at this. So the article starts off talking about inflation, record high gas prices. As we've already covered, this is not lending itself to good polling numbers for Biden. With all that in mind, why would an alliance composed of the Biden administration, Wall Street firms, banks, corporations, and the United Nations be pursuing a plan that would very specifically raise the prices of oil and gas? So let's talk about bite your tongue, Jim. Now let's talk about the United Nations Race to Zero campaign. So according to the United Nations, Race to Zero is a global campaign to rally leadership and support from businesses, cities, regions, investors for a healthy, resilient, zero carbon recovery that prevents future threats, creates decent jobs, and unlocks inclusive, sustainable growth. These real economy actors join 120 countries in the largest ever alliance committed to achieving net zero carbon emissions by 2050 at the latest, according to the United Nations. One of the most important Race to Zero partner coalitions is the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, or GFANZ, a large group of, quote, leading financial institutions committed to accelerating the decarbonization of the economy. So this group includes, some of the largest banks, asset managers, insurance companies, basically anyone that advocates for the Great Reset is a part of this. Well, on June 15th, the United Nations-backed Race to Zero campaign announced that it has tightened its already strict energy policies for its extremely large, exceptionally powerful membership group, pushing the world towards an even greater energy crisis. So this change is going to require the GFANZ and the Race to Zero members to, within a year, quote, phase down and out all unabated fossil fuels as part of a just transition, something which was previously implicit. This is reading from Justin's article. Race to Zero's website further notes, quote, in practice, this means corporations and investors must restrict the development, financing, and facilitation of new fossil fuel assets, which include new coal projects. So in a world where energy and gas prices are skyrocketing, the UN and all of these parties that I just listed are planning to double, triple, and quadruple down on the policies that caused this problem to happen in the first place. And all of these banks and governments and investment firms are now going to tighten their grip around the throat of reliable energy across the globe. Jim, too heavy for you? What are your thoughts on this? I mean, this goes beyond, you know, Joe Biden. This is all of the Great Reset ESG apparatus in full effect here.
When you're reading all that to me and I'm listening to it, you know, my mind went to, you know, if you spend any time on Twitter, or if you have any friends that are on the left, one of their biggest fears, they fear, and he's with the Handmaid's Tale, right? They fear living in a theocracy. This race to zero and ESG and the Great Reset and all this stuff, that's living in an actual theocracy. These are cultists. These are people who are going to impose their fantasy of life, of how life can actually exist on the rest of us, because they have the power to do it. America was never a theocracy. As big as or as supposedly powerful as the conservative coalition was in the 1980s with Jerry Falwell and those kinds of things, you know, they didn't really have any real cultural power. And they certainly didn't have a lot of influence on policy in the government. These cultists who believe this stuff, who think we can go to a carbon dioxide emitting free future by 2050, that is magical thinking. That is insane. And if they actually are able to put these policies in place, it's going to cost the lives of literally billions of people. As Joe Biden would say, that's not a joke. I mean it, literally. Billions of people will die under this agenda, and it's cultish. None of this is remotely grounded in reality. But we are seeing countries. It gives me a little bit of hope when you see countries like Germany, for instance. Germany should be a great example of what a green energy economy looks like. They expected it to be an enormous success. It is an enormous failure. And they are now restarting coal plants in Germany because their politicians are not stupid enough that they want their citizens to actually die because they do not have enough power to heat their homes or cool their homes. And their economy would completely collapse if they didn't have reliable energy. So they're going back to coal. So when you see stuff like that happening in Europe, the heart of all of this nonsense, the reality does set in. You know, we're never going to get to, you know, net zero or whatever the hell it is by 2050, because it's just not it's just not practical to do. So let these cultists have their fun. Let them have meetings. Let them get in private jets to fly to a nice location in Europe somewhere and have meetings. But if any of this stuff becomes actual policy, lots and lots of people are going to die. Period.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, and what's kind of funny, because when I was talking about this with Justin, I was like, you know, like the kind of the historical conservative and historical liberal of the past 2 decades were both half right about this stuff. It's like the conservatives thought the United Nations was going to be this national government that was going to dictate policy on all of the member countries underneath it. And then the liberals thought that these big international corporations are going to dictate their policy and how the country should be run on all of the underlings that have to buy their products. In reality, it's a mixture of both. The United Nations is using these international corporations to enforce all of this terrible stuff on us. It's crazy, but this is, again, part and parcel of the Great Reset. I mean, Chris, when we were first talking to you about some of this Great Reset and ESG stuff, you were kind of a little skeptical of it. You know, what was the impact that this was going to have? You know, what were the teeth that some of these things were going to come along with it? But I think you've seen by now that the power, the insidious nature of all of this stuff is very, very powerful.
Well, yeah, first of all, if they were really genuine about their caring for the environment and their desire to reduce CO2 emissions, they would.
Dope.
So first of all, the fact that they are opposed to nuclear shows that they have ulterior motives at hand. And I think the ulterior motives are making lots of money, because I think that this whole Green New Deal, green energy, renewable solar, wind turbine, movement is all about money, because I think that these people realize that, hey, you know what, if we can just like push the economy to move in that direction, and we control those companies like, you know, Al Gore does, and many other very influential green radicals, they're going to make out like bandits.
Yes.
Okay, and the rules are not going to apply to them. Al Gore and John Kerry and Larry Fink and all these people, they are not going to abide by the rules that they're setting for the rest of us. So they're just, they're just the overlords who are saying, we're going to put the system in place. You are going to live under it. We are not going to live under it. And that's just the way it's going to be. It kind of reminds me of a place like North Korea or the Soviet Union or Cuba or Venezuela, where the people making the decisions do not live with the decisions that they make.
Right.
And that is a recipe for disaster in the United States of America. And I think that the American people are going to reject this in full come 2022. And I think that this is going to be a giant wake-up call for the Democratic Party and these radical leftists who are hell-bent on, shoving their green energy agenda down our throats. I can't stress this enough. Almost everywhere I go, people are sick and tired of the, sky-high price of gas and inflation across the board. And I think that they are really going to make their voices heard. We saw in the Texas special election, there's a district in very, very southern tip of Texas, right in the Rio Grande Valley, that has not gone Republican in more than 150 years. Hey, guess what happened last week? It went Republican overwhelmingly. Myra Flores just inaugurated into Congress a couple days ago. So I think that this is going to be a just complete reckoning.
I mean, it has to be. It has to be because, like I said, this what I just described right there goes beyond just American politics. This is an international coalition of all of these, the most influential people that you could imagine that are pushing this on us. So it has to be an absolute reckoning to send a signal even up past the federal government and all of that stuff.
And well, and I, the American people want a clean environment. They want, they do. They want clean air. They want clean water. So, but this is not about that.
No,
this is about a unrealistic agenda of going to zero greenhouse gas emissions in a decade or so. It's insane.
But wait, there's more. There's more, Jim. That wasn't it of the plan here. This again, sneak peek reading from Justin's op-ed, unpublished so far, and that's not all. And perhaps the most remarkable part of the policy change, the UN's Race to Zero indicated that it will now require members to lobby in favor of government policies that will promote Race to Zero's views on climate change, effectively turning thousands of the world's most powerful private businesses into a propaganda operation for many left-wing politicians. According to Race to Zero, this part of the policy change is called Persuade. Don't you love that? Persuade. And it will, in their own words, mandate that members, quote, align their lobbying and advocacy activities with net zero by proactively supporting climate policies at the subnational and national level consistent with the Race to Zero criteria.
But mandate and persuade do not jive with one another.
Yeah, I know. So turning all these massive corporations, all of these massive banks and investment firms, all these massive insurance companies into lobbyists for the climate agenda. Seems a little insurmountable. What do you think, Jim?
Oh, I mean, God, if there's one thing we don't have enough of, especially here in the United States, it's corporations telling us to be green and pushing the radical climate agenda. God, I never see commercials on that. We really should get more of those out there. It's as if they get higher dividends just by climate virtue signaling. Like suddenly their stock will go up 20 points for doing that. It's ridiculous. But all of this, do you guys get the sense that these people are in a bit of a hurry to do all of this? And there's a reason for that. And this all, I guess I say this a lot. It all goes back to 2016. Trump was never supposed to be president. This was never supposed to happen.
Right.
Barack Obama was going to do the soft handoff to Hillary Clinton, who would obviously have 2 terms, and they were going to roll a lot of this stuff out slowly. So it wouldn't have so much economic pain because there would have been political consequences to it. So they figured they had 8 years after Obama with 8 years of Hillary Clinton, and they could have done this stuff. They probably even had a year-by-year plan on how all these policies were going to be implemented. And then suddenly Hillary didn't win, and not only did Trump win, but he spent his 4 years showing that this stuff can be reversed, that we can actually have a clean environment, but also have our own energy in this country, that we can, we can deregulate, we can get regulations out of people's way so that the economy, all sectors of the economy, but especially the energy economy, can thrive. And so they realized, oh, crap, not only are we 4 years behind, we're probably 7 years behind what we want to do, because Trump showed and did roll back a lot of regulations. That's why all this stuff is happening at 500 miles an hour. We used to just be moving toward the edge of the cliff at the speed limit. And now we're blasting past the speed limit and going right over the cliff, because they figure again, 2022, the November election is coming. They figure they only have now a few more months to get a lot of this stuff done, because yes, Republicans are going to be in charge of both the House and the Senate, guaranteed. And basically the entire Biden agenda is dead on arrival. It will go absolutely nowhere. So they have to do it all right now. And so it's also in coordination with all of these international groups. Yeah. I guess they probably figure once our momentum is stopped in November, the international coalition of all of this stuff will keep the momentum going, and maybe we'll get it back again. If Joe Biden is reelected or Kamala Harris takes his place or whatever, they figure they can get it done then. But this is all happening because of one thing that happened in 2016, Hillary losing. This is why all this is happening so damn fast.
And another thing to kind of make mention of is the idea that all this ESG stuff, while it's kind of relatively speaking new to me in just the past couple of years, the infrastructure for this stuff has been set up for years, decades, and it just was flying under the radar. It just kind of it just assumed a very innocuous identity, and it wasn't on the radar of politicians and all of that to fight back against it. People that are watching this show, for the most part, probably maybe they were aware of it but didn't realize how important it is. And now the more that we dig into this, the more obvious it is that this is incredibly important, probably the most important stuff that's going on right now. So hopefully, if people that are a little bit more friendly to our point of view are in office in the coming 2 to 4 years, this will still be squarely on their radar, and they can take steps to fight back against this at a governmental level. And thanks to toot our own horn here, but the actions of the Heartland Institute and our government relations department and everything that Justin does and all of that stuff has put this issue squarely on the radars of a whole lot of state level policymakers across the country. So we're in a fairly good position here, despite the fact that we are, we've got these Goliaths that are 10,000 times our size working against us. But, it's just kind of it.
Well, Donnie, but you know what?
We have a little bit of hope. We've got a rock in a sling, I think.
It's frustrating because during the Trump administration, the U.S. decreased its CO2 emissions even faster than the rate it was supposed to under the Paris Agreement. So under Donald Trump, we were actually making progress on that.
Sure.
So it's not as if CO2 rates were climbing and the air was, filthy and, our water was, dangerous by any means whatsoever.
Right.
So they're just making this stuff up.
Well, the goal isn't to reduce CO2 emissions. The goal is to control the economies of the free West. Period.
Right.
That's it.
Yes.
And of course, control the people, control our activities, because freedom is dangerous. Having people do just whatever they want without harming anybody else or harming the environment.
Right.
Yeah. That's what it's about.
Last week, we talked about how Exxon acquired $30 billion in loans to upgrade their infrastructure when they were coming out of the pandemic so that they could adequately meet gas needs as people started driving around again. This development would destroy oil and gas companies' ability to do just that. They will be unable to get any loans to build new refineries or anything like that. This is seriously choking off this industry if this goes into full effect, which, the plan is to have it up and operational in just 1 year here. And this is the story that changed my mind about all of this stuff, that I kind of teased all of this with Jim saying that this is all intentional and all of that, because I naively thought that winning an election was the most important thing to the ruling class. If gas prices were too high, then they were going to have to do something to rescue their chances of staying in power. And their hemming and hawing about climate change is just an election tactic. But when the rubber meets the road, they'll fold and allow reliable energy to flow freely again. Nope, I was wrong. So something like this is not the result of inept politicians pursuing policies that align with some polling. No, this is a deep-seated plan to destroy reliable energy. I see that now.
Yeah, we just played a clip of Joe Biden saying repeatedly that this was his plan from the beginning.
I hear you. I hear you. I just thought that would relent after, the repercussions of those policies were starting to be felt. And obviously, I see it now, and I have seen it. I was a contributor to the Great Reset book. Got it right here. If you haven't read it, you should. Great Reset. So I'm aware of how these things are planned out and executed. I just had a little hope that perhaps politicians' own selfish desire to retain power would trump these, global schemes. But now I know I was wrong. So there is one other thing that I want to get to.
Well, Donnie, can I ask one last question on this? Do you think that Joe Biden is actually making these decisions, or do you think that it's Ron Klain and other people in the White House who are making these decisions?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I don't even think he makes the decision to what pants he's going to wear in the
So morning. I don't think Ron Klain even cares whether Joe Biden's going to be reelected or not, because he would not be the chief of staff for a second presidential term anyway. So I think that they just have marching orders from Obama and from other bigwigs in the Democratic Party to just go in, just do as much of this as possible, just ram it down the throats. And, Joe Biden, he'll just be collateral damage.
Well, here, so I think we've got a good theory here. Biden is going to allow a bunch of these things to play out. He'll preside over the country while the foundation of this radical transformation is built. He'll be the fall guy and take all the political fallout. And it doesn't matter because he's going to retire after this anyways. But we still have a puzzle piece that I think we have to kind of fit into all of this. And it comes in regards to things that he is doing because of gas prices going up. So he claims he's encouraging oil and gas companies to produce more product. He's like begging them to. He's going hat in hand to Saudi Arabia. Or did he do that yet? I don't know.
Going to.
Next month.
Okay. And now, most recently, he is calling for a 3-month suspension of the federal gas tax. So, Jim, if Biden is ushering in this radical change for the country, why is he doing any of this stuff? What do you think?
Because he thinks he can fool just enough voters to have the Democrats not get completely annihilated in November. But people are not that dumb. Even there was an analyst. I didn't see this. I read about it because only Chris on this podcast can watch CNN. I can't bring myself to do it. But I read that even a CNN analyst said that this gas tax holiday is a gimmick. Hell, Barack Obama. When he was running against John McCain advocated a gas tax holiday, and Obama called it a gimmick. But now his dementia patient former vice president is now out there doing this. But look, so let's talk a little bit about this gas taxes, by the way. And I read the other day, the oil companies make around 30 cents a gallon in profit.
Oh, really? I thought it was like 5 to 10 cents.
Okay, so let's just say that 30 that I read, let's just say that's on the high end. In Illinois, the state of Illinois makes 38 cents a gallon on the tax. And then if you add in the federal tax, which is 18 cents, so government makes a lot more money on the sale of a gallon of gas than the oil companies do. Right. And so this idea that you're going to reduce the gas, reduce the gas taxes or have a holiday is going to have any real effect on gas prices, or it's going to fool any voters, is completely nuts. And it's just really something. I've never witnessed this political dynamic in my life, where the president of the United States is basically standing with his boot on the face of the oil companies and punching them with his free fist, and also asking them, hey, could you help me out? It's like an abusive relationship. Right. He's crushing them while at the same time asking them to do him a favor. It's like, how do you think people don't see this? How do you think this is going to work? It's not even smart politics. It's dumb.
Well, it's also really bad policy because one of the unintended consequences of it is it's actually probably going to lead to gas prices going up. And here's why. If the federal gas tax is rescinded for a short period of time, 90 days, it's going to cause people to rush to the gas station, fill up their cars. And what's going to happen? You're going to get even less supply with more demand. I'm serious. I mean, this is just economics 101. So
prices aren't high because the oil companies are price gouging everybody. It's an absolute supply and demand issue. I mentioned earlier, and this should be repeated, that the Biden administration, there's an oil refinery in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and they wanted to expand, right? Joe Biden says explicitly, we need more refined gasoline here in the United States and available to us. A refinery in the Virgin Islands wanted to expand to help out with this problem, right? And what did the Biden's EPA do? They said, no, you can't do that. And again, why? Because of environmental justice, because there's too many poor people that will smell the refinery near their homes. So we can't do it. And so, is it on purpose? The oil companies are trying. And again, the supply of refined gas in the United States is down because of decisions like this. People are not dumb. They can figure this out. Just got to know the facts.
Yeah. Well, so the whole gas tax thing. So I know that's a big, 18 cents federal gas tax. Like that's not a whole lot or whatever. I'll take what I can get. I will admit that. But there's also some kind of gimmicks being played at a state level. And I've got this tax foundation chart, Andy, if you want to pull that up. But there's a gimmick being played here where we have a governor's race happening in Illinois where he's running ads. Pritzker is running ads talking about how he's freezing the state gas tax. And when he says that, he doesn't mean eliminating it. He's not talking about a tax holiday like Biden is talking about. He's talking about a pause from the increase of where it currently is to a 2 cents higher increase that he mandated, Pritzker mandated.
Yes.
So when you look at this chart, this is actually worse than what you were saying, Jim, because there is, governments are crafty about the way that they tax their populace. So they do have in Illinois, it's like a 40-cent tax just on each gallon of gasoline. But they also have taxes on wholesalers, which, as we know, are just passed down to the consumers. And there's also a sales tax that's on gasoline. So if you look at the Illinois on this map, it's actually well north of 40 cents. It says 59 cents, and that's not including the federal taxes. So 59 cents plus the 18 cents in federal tax. And surely there's some other, indirect ways that the federal tax is being levied on gasoline. So we're talking about close to, if not slightly above, 80 cents a gallon in taxes in Illinois. 80 cents. And that's compared to, even if we give Jim's number of 30 cents in profit to the oil companies, I've seen it closer to 5 to 10 cents. So maybe somewhere in the middle there. But the government is making out way more than the oil companies are when this transaction has happened. A voluntary transactions happens when you go to the gas pump. And in California, which is, I think, the worst state in this map, 67 cents at the state level. 67 cents plus 18 cents at the federal level. So nearly $1 of every gallon of gas purchased in California is attributed to taxes. Like this is, if you're looking for a problem, if you're looking for price gougers, don't look at the oil companies. Look at the governments, because that's what's going on. So Chris, I don't know. My theory on my question that I started off this whole gas tax holiday thing was, why is Biden doing any of this? If he's actually the one that's presiding over the building of the foundation of this transformational, radical transformation, why is he doing that? And I'll just say that my before I get your insights, my theory on this is that it's just cover for the rest of the Democratic Party. So even after Joe Biden is gone, they can still point to some of these things as proof that the Dems have some solutions to people's problems. But I'll give you a last word on this.
I just think it's an attempt, like Jim said, to try to convince the American people that, hey, we're doing something about this. We're trying to lower the price of gasoline by 18 cents a gallon. Big wow. So, but the American people, they realize that 18 cents a gallon is nothing when you're paying $5 a gallon for gas.
Sure.
And in a typical gas tank, that's going to be like $3 at most. You're saving $3 every time you fill up your tank. I mean, this is like, this is let them eat cake, French Revolution stuff that I'm seeing here. Really, seriously.
Right. Yeah, well, this is the stuff that I went over with all that G fans and the race to zero and these kind of the international, groups, governments, UN, all of that stuff. you're not going to really see a whole lot of that talk on just your standard media outlets. Like you do really have to, and again, this might be just me tooting my own horn here, but you really do have to tune in to like our podcast to kind of get the latest on some of this stuff. Like it's pretty crazy. And I know that some of it's in the weeds and it doesn't make for great 30-second sound bites on a clip on, corporate media and all of that. But like, this is really the important stuff that's under the hood here. So I just want to encourage everyone that hasn't already to hit that subscribe button, to like and share this content, leave a comment below the video, and all of the things that you can do to help kind of break through those big tech algorithms that prevents content like this from reaching more eyes. Jim, I'll give you last word on this podcast.
Oh, well, yes, definitely subscribe. And next time, if you're watching the show, we have such a great group of people who watch live and leave things in the chat. Bring a friend, bring one other person to the show next week, and we'll see if we can help grow that way.
Yep. All right. Fantastic. Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining in for this episode of In the Tank podcast. Join us every week for a new episode. Again, for those audio-only listeners that are catching this on a Friday, join us a day earlier on Thursdays at noon Central Time. Leave your comments and questions in the chat there. Maybe we'll show your comments on screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. Also, you can follow us on Twitter, which is 20% better than it was a couple of months ago, by following In the Tank Pod. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for the show, feel free to email us at inthethankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At J Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
And Chris Talgo, what do you have to pitch today?
StoppingSocialism.com and heartland.org.
Fantastic. Thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next week.
Your organization is terrible.